a decision to love, a decision to hope, a decision to find peace, a decision for joy. These things are key. When you wake up in the morning, you have joy not because you feel that you have joy because the joy of the Lord is your strength. And whether you feel joyful or not does not change the fact that the joy of the Lord is your strength. Am I making sense? You have peace not because you feel peaceful, not because you've got that peaceful, easy feeling. You feel peace because Christ is your peace. Jesus says, I give you a peace that the world cannot take away. You have peace because you have Christ. It is not open for discussion. You make a decision to have peace. You love not because you feel like loving. Many of us have been challenged this way. You look at someone and you want to strangle them. Some of you may have had that experience just recently, but we won't point any fingers. But you feel like you want to strangle that person, but you make a decision. You decide to love, not because you feel like loving, but because the power of Christ, the gospel of Christ, compels us to love. It is not an option. Friends, the candles of Advent represent things in our lives, represent themes that are eternal, and they represent things that are not open for debate. They are not things that we do because we feel like them. They are things that compel us because they are who we are. Peace, hope, love, joy. They are not feelings, my friends. You decide these things. Decisions are tough. I know that. I know they can be scary sometimes. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of the story of a married couple who was celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. And this isn't about anybody in particular. I want you to know that. That's what how the story goes. But they were celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. At the party, everybody wanted to know how they managed to stay married so long. The husband responded, well, when we were first married, we came to an agreement. The agreement was I make all the major decisions, and she'll make all the minor decisions. And the man said, and now, 60 years later, I can thankfully say we've never had a major decision to make. It's a thing. Some decisions you make, like I said, some decisions are made for you. But they can be difficult decisions. They're not always the decisions that you want to make. In life, you'll be faced with so many of these things. So many decisions to be made. You said, well, Rudy, I thought this was a sermon about love and not a sermon about decision making, and you're right. It is a sermon about love. And loving someone and showing Christ-like love can often be the most difficult decision we make. I don't want to tell you what love is. Most of you have been in church for quite some time, know the definition of Christian love. You've heard it time and time again. You've heard sermons preached about it. You've sung songs about it. You've read scripture about it. You've done Bible studies about it. You know what Christ-like love is. And if you don't know what Christ-like love is, there's one thing you know. You know that you can find it in here. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It'll tell you exactly what Christ-like love is. But the other thing you also know is that Christ-like love is difficult. I don't have to tell you that because, again, you've heard sermons about this time and time and time again. That Christ-like love is difficult. That loving someone who doesn't deserve it is difficult. That loving someone who makes you angry is difficult. That loving the unlovable is difficult. That loving the man that you've never seen before, loving your enemy is difficult. I don't have to tell you these things. You know these things. You know how difficult it is to show the love that Jesus Christ wants us to show. What I'm challenging you to do today is to make the decision to do that. The challenge is to decide to love. And that, my friends, is difficult, isn't it? I'll close with two quick stories. One of them is one that you're very familiar with. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. You find this story in Luke chapter 10, and Jesus tells a story about a certain man who's traveling from Jericho to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was robbed and he was beaten half to death, the Bible tells us. And along comes a priest, and the priest looks at him and passes him on the other side of the road. And then a Levite comes and looks at him and passes him on the other side of the road. And this is what I find interesting. The story doesn't tell us that if the man was a Jew or Samaritan, but I always imagine the man to be a Jew, the one who was, and let me say I am taking some biblical liberty here, but I always imagine if the man was a Jew that was beaten up. And all of a sudden, this Samaritan comes along, and he's half unconscious, he's half dead, he doesn't know who's helping him. But if he knew, because you knew how the Jews felt about the Samaritans, right? You've heard about this? The Jews, let me put it like this, hated the Samaritans. The Samaritans were half-breeds. They hated the Samaritans. And if this man was laying there, was a Jew, if he had found out that a Samaritan had helped him, what would he think? What would he do? But the Samaritan helped him nonetheless. Dr. Martin Luther King, after visiting the Holy Land, talks about his trip from Jericho to Jerusalem. He says that's a dangerous road. In the days of Jesus, it became known as the Bloody Pass, says Dr. King. And you know it is possible that the priest and the Levite looked over that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Dr. King continues, or it's possible that they felt that that man on the ground was merely faking, that he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them, to lure them over there. And so the first question that the priest asked, and the first question that the Levite asked, says Dr. King, is if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? Dr. King continues, but then the Good Samaritan came by. And he reversed the question. And he said, if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? Love is a decision you make. And it is a decision that you make in small ways. There's a story told about a man who was eloquently describing to his wife how much he loved her. And he said, honey, I would climb the highest mountain for you. I would walk over a sea of broken glass for you. I guess that's an option because I hear that all the time. I didn't realize that. But I would walk over a sea of broken glass for you. I would swim the widest ocean. I would do anything to prove my love to you. And the wife looked at him and calmly replied, sweetheart, that probably won't be necessary today. But if you can hang up your towel and take out the trash, I'd appreciate that. Each of us here will proclaim great things to show our love for Christ. And in so doing, we may even proclaim great things to show Christ how much we love Him by loving our neighbor. Jesus, we may say, I would take a bullet for my neighbor, even though they don't deserve it. Jesus, we may say, I would do anything for my neighbor. If my neighbor was sick, I would do anything. I would give my own health to have my neighbor feel better. We would do great and grand things to show our love to God and show our love for our neighbor. My challenge to you is to do little things. Speak a kind word when a harsh one would feel so much better. To turn the other cheek, as Christ has called us to. To give when you will get nothing in return. To sacrifice when that person does not deserve any sacrifice. To make a decision to do the small things for Jesus Christ. Forget your grand ideas. In this season, it's easy to have grand ideas. Forget your grand ideas. When you leave this place, you watch every word that you speak. And you capture every thought that is not of God. You hold your life together one moment at a time. And you make a decision to follow Christ. The ending of the Good Samaritan story is very, very meaningful. Jesus asked the Pharisee, who was the man's neighbor? And the Pharisee responded, the one who had mercy on him. And then Jesus says this, go now and do likewise. Friends, go and do likewise. Love your neighbor. Make a decision every moment, to love as Christ would have you love.